Before the age of the War of the Ring, when the armies of Mordor sought to break the strength of Gondor in the south, another conflict brewed far to the north. Here, the Witch-king of Angmar led a determined campaign against the Dunedain of Arthedain. For in the north lay another great and powerful realm of men that Sauron's forces aimed to conquer in their quest for dominance over the west. To achieve this, Angmar must first be obliterated. Thus, from his fortress of Carn Dum, Sauron's most lethal servant, the Witch-king of Angmar, orchestrated his formidable assault, a campaign of steel, blood, and dark sorcery. Join me as we delve deep into the legend of this captivating and often overlooked chapter in Middle-earth's history, brought to life like never before with previously hidden artistry and animated battle maps. Experience every dark twist, each astonishing turn, and every battle fought in the Angmar War. In the Second Age, Elendil led the faithful exiles of Númenor to Middle-earth. In the year 3320, Elendil raised his banner and, with the wisdom of a powerful lord of Númenor, established a new kingdom, Arthedain, the realm of the faithful. Yet Elendil was not alone in his charge. Far to the south, his sons, Isildur and Anarion, landed upon different shores, where they founded the realm of Gondor, standing proudly alongside Arthedain. Thus, the faithful descendants of Númenor laid their foundations in the soils of Middle-earth. Elendil spoke of Númenor's glorious rise and fall, and the return of the kings of men to Middle-earth, born from the depths of the sea upon the wings of a storm. Elendil the Tall and his mighty sons, Isildur and Anarion, became great lords, ruling the northern realm of Angmar and the southern domain of Gondor. Over the mouths of the Anduin in Angmar, the Dunedain forged a prosperous kingdom and built wondrous cities, such as the jewel of the realm, Anúmenor, which lay on the southeastern shore of Lake Nanuil, near the source of the Brandywine River. However, the founding of Arthedain was but one thread in the tapestry of Elendil's fate. Alongside his sons, Isildur and Anarion, he marched his forces to Mordor to confront the great evil of their age, Sauron. Together with the elves under their high king Gil-galad, they laid siege to Barad-dûr for 7 long years. The last alliance of men and elves endured the onslaught of the Dark Lord's forces until, at last, Sauron himself approached and was slain on the slopes of Mount Doom by Elendil and Gil-galad. Yet the cost of victory was immense. Both Elendil and Gil-galad fell in battle against Sauron, who took Anarion's life as well. This left Isildur, Elendil's eldest son, to bear the weight of their great legacy alone. Thus, as the Third Age unfolded, Isildur became the High King of both Angmar in the north and Gondor in the south. But fate was cruel to Isildur, and his reign was to be brief. Only 2 winters had passed when he too was struck down, ambushed by orcs in the Gladden fields. His body, along with the one ring he had cut from Sauron's hand, was lost to the waters of the Anduin. The crown now passed to Valandil, Isildur's youngest son, who was but a child when his father's flame was extinguished. As he grew, he would not claim the throne of Gondor, which had been effectively governed by his cousin Meneldyl for many years. Thus, the realms of Gondor and Arthedain would be divided. Yet, the division of the kingdoms of men was not to end there, and the Dunedain of the north would soon seal their own dark fate. For 8 ages, the line of Elendil kept the realm of Angmar intact, but the strength of the Dunedain waned over time, and tensions rose among those of the royal line. In 861 of the Third Age, Lord Enda, the last ruler of a united Angmar, passed from the world, marking the unraveling of the realm. Elendil's great kingdom would now fragment and splinter as the heirs of Anarion fought over the throne. 3 new kingdoms arose in place of one, each with its own pride and aspirations. To the northwest, where the winds whispered of ancient power, Arthedain flourished, ruled by Amathond, Anarion's eldest son and rightful heir. To the south, beneath the shadow of the Great Road and the flowing Brandywine, lay the realm of Cardolan, where its lord gazed north with weary eyes, ever mindful of their cousins in Arthedain. To the east, nestled between the rugged Weather Hills and the swift-running Brandywine, rose the realm of Rudor, ever restless in its quest for power. Conflict often arose between these kingdoms, as these lands were home to the proud Dunedain. The central point of contention was the ownership of the Weather Hills and the land towards the west, near Bree. In this delicate balance of power, there was one thing in particular that both Cardolan and Rhudaur coveted above all else: Amon Sul, standing proudly upon the hills. It was built by the men of old to house one of the Palantiri, the Seeing Stones. Whoever controlled Amon Sul would command knowledge of what lay beyond the horizon. And in these darkening days, such knowledge was a prize beyond compare. Sure enough, soon another shadow began to stir, one that the men of the north would watch with great interest and fear. Around the year 1300 of the Third Age, whispers of a new power reached the ears of men. At first, it seemed like a storm was brewing on the horizon, its approach unannounced by the drums of war or the calls of champions. Instead, it was marked by a heavy, watchful silence that crept down from the mountains. This was no mere wandering clan seeking to claim the land. No, this was something far more sinister, a realm born of pure malevolence and shadow, the realm of Angmar. As with all shadows left unchecked, it grew, and the very land seemed to retreat as the air thickened with a hidden malevolence. For Angmar sought not just conquest but destruction, thriving on strife and drawing strength from the divisions among the three realms, a fracture at the heart of Arthedain that had only widened with time. Its ruler, a figure cloaked in mystery, was said to be as elusive as he was feared. Soon, the people of Arthedain would learn his name, whispered in dread, the Witch-king. He would attract all things wicked that lurked in the dark corners of the world. At that time, the realm of Angmar emerged in the north, beyond the Etten Moors. Its territories lay on both sides of the mountains, where many wicked men, orcs, and other foul creatures from the wilds gathered. Orcs scurried like vermin from their holes, eager to serve a new master who promised them blood and victory. They amassed within Angmar's darkened halls, ready to unleash their cruelty upon the people of Aenir. To them, the Witch-king was a leader worthy of respect, a towering figure of terror who gave purpose to their mindless brutality. But it was not only orcs who answered the call. From the distant lands, where their hearts had become twisted with greed and malice, came vile men, brigands and pirates, those who lived by the sword and the suffering of others. They flocked to Angmar, finding their place among the wicked. With each passing season, the dark fortress of Khan Dum, the Witch-king's twisted, frozen heart, became the center of a growing army of evil. From this stronghold, the Witch-king watched, amassing his strength, his cruel mind ever plotting. Thus, the north fell silent, a calm before the storm of war that would sweep across the lands. Darkness had come to claim what was once bright and fair. Angmar was rising during the reign of King Agb of Arthedain. The lines of rulers in both Cardolan and Rhudaur faltered. This meant that, aside from Agb himself, no other heirs of Isildur remained in Aenir. With the blood of kings still coursing through his veins, Agb sought to reunite the fractured realms under his banner. The lords of Cardolan, in their wisdom, acknowledged Agb as their sovereign. However, in Rhudaur, the proud and noble men of the west had dwindled. The throne of Rhudaur had been seized by a king of savage hillmen, a usurper who would never willingly surrender his realm to Agb. This new ruler posed a far greater threat than he initially appeared, for he was tainted by the dark will of Angmar, a puppet of the Witch-king. Agb realized that storm clouds gathered and that he could not face the combined forces of Angmar and Rhudaur unprotected. Thus, in the Weather Hills, he ordered fortifications to be built. The morning they carved out the path, for the first time since they had left the Chetwood, led directly to the sea. It ran cleverly, taking a line that seemed chosen to keep as much hidden as possible from both the peaks above and the plains to the west. It wound through dells and embraced steep banks, and where it overlooked flatter, more open ground on either side, there were lines of enormous rocks and standing stones that shielded the travelers almost like a rampart. "I wonder who made this way and for what purpose," said Mary as they walked along one of these paths, where the stones were remarkably large and closely set. "I don't know that I like it. It has a rather cart-like, whitish appearance. Is there any cart on Weathertop?" "No, there is no hand truck on Weathertop, nor on any of these hills," replied Strider. The men of the West did not dwell here, but in their final days, they defended the hills for some time against the evil that emerged from Angmar. This path was made to serve the fortifications along the Weather Hills. The men of Arthedain and Cardolan stood shoulder to shoulder, like brothers, ever watchful, their eyes scanning the horizon beyond which darkness festered. Their watch would not last long before the forces of Angmar and Rudor descended upon King Agb. Brave and unyielding fought alongside his men, his sword a gleaming shard of hope in the dim light of battle, yet hope alone could not turn the tide, and in the year 1356, he fell slain in battle. His death sent a tremor through the land, and some felt that hope was fading, but from that grief arose Alg his son. This new king did not let despair drown his spirit, with the fires of vengeance and duty burning in his chest. Alg rallied his men, and they would not stand alone for hearing of their peril. Kidden sent a host of elven warriors forth from Linden to aid them. Together they struck back, driving the enemies from the hills that Agb had given his life to defend. Once more the frontier was restored, and during the years that followed the lands of Eredine and Cardan stood together, and stood firm. They guarded the Weather Hills, the great road that cut through the wilderness, and the lower reaches of the Horwell, where the waters flowed cold and swift. The struggle was far from over, but for a time the north could catch its music. Breath after the intervention of the elves of Linden, the Witch-king sought retribution, but Lion was distant, and vast lands filled with enemies lay between his realm and theirs. But there were other elves now that the Witch-king controlled. Rudder through his puppet king, a smaller and less well-defended settlement of the elves lay upon his doorstep, and so it is said that in those long-faded days the hidden refuge of Rivendell was besieged and the fires of war burned. At the foot of the mountains here dwell Elrond, the wise and noble lord of Rivendell. Elon possessed a ring of power, Villia, the most powerful of the three rings of the elves, but the second siege of Rivendell could not be undone by his strength alone, and Elon knew that Angar could not be allowed to extinguish the flickering light of hope that had long dwelled in his fair haven. Thus, in the hour of Rivendell's most dire need, Elrond sent for aid across the mountains to the Gatham of Luran, and from beyond the towering peaks a relief force was assembled in haste. Across the high passes of the mountains, and through mist-laden valleys the reinforcements marched, and they came to Imladris, and lent their strength to Rivendell, and at last the siege was broken. Yet the storm of war did not confine itself to Rivendell alone, for in the very same year 1409 of the Third Age, the Witch-king sent forth a second host with the intention of securing Amon. Amonul provided a major strategic advantage for Agol, and the capture of its Polena would blind the Dunad to his movements across the cold waters of the river. They came, their banners flapping like raven wings, as they crossed into Cardan, and surrounded the high tower there. On the windswept heights Alg son of Agb stood against the tide, but the Dunad were overrun, their swords broken, their shields shattered. Alg fell, and with him died many of the proud defenders of that ancient stronghold, yet not all, for amid the ruin, in the smoke-choked twilight of that terrible day, the Paler was snatched from the grasp of defeat, and carried northward back to Fanost, where hope still lingered. The forces of the Witch-king now finally stood in the hilltop fortress, but he did not intend to simply capture it, for he knew that the Dunad would soon dedicate all their strength to driving his forces back once more. So instead, he ordered the ancient landmarks steeped in the history of the Northern Kingdom to be destroyed. The strong stone walls were sewered by fire and the cruel hands of the enemy, and the fortress crumbled into ruin. But long before, in the first days of the North Kingdom, they built a great watchtower on Weathertop. Amon they called it. It was burned and broken, and nothing remains of it now but a tumbled ring like a rough crown on the old hills. Once it was tall and fair. It is told that Elendil stood there watching for the coming of Gilgalad out of the west in the days of the last alliance, as the frontier was broken and the defenders fled. Cardan was ravaged, its fields trampled beneath the iron feet of war, its people murdered, its cities burned, and its lands laid waste. Yet pockets of resistance would endure in the Barrow Downs. The ancient mounds of Tion Gorad, a remnant of the Dúnedain, held fast, their spirits unbroken, and in the deep woods beyond others chose to remain and dwell among the trees, hidden from the eye of the enemy. After this defeat, the land of Ruda fell under a darker shadow. Still no one lives in this land. Men once dwelt here ages ago, but none remain now. They became an evil people, as legends tell, for they fell under the shadow of Angmar, but that is now so long ago that the hills have forgotten them. Though a shadow still lies on the land, the once proud realm, now crawling with evil men bound to the will of Angmar, was forsaken by those few Dúnedain who had not already perished. Their halls were abandoned and their banners torn down. Ruda had utterly fallen and was now a vassal of Angmar, but even in the shadow of this great devastation Eredine endured, and there remained the spirit of resistance. J.R.R, son of the fallen Alg, though young and untested, took up his father's sword. He was not yet of full age, but the fire of his forebears burned bright within him, and he stood ready to lead his men in the defense of the kingdom, as the forces of Angmar stood poised to strike now into Eredine, surrounded, outnumbered, and demoralized. It seemed as if Eredine and its young king were at last doomed, but learning of the plight of the young J.R.R, kidden the shipwright marched to the aid of the Dúnad. The gleaming warriors bolstered the defenses and rekindled hope in the defenders, and so with the help of the elves of Lindon, J.R.R led a desperate last defense of Eredine. The combined strength and skill of the Dúnad and the Eldar were too much for their foe. Together they drove the forces of Angmar from Fornos and the North Downs, finally stalling the relentless march of their grim enemy. And now the other hosts of the elves also came forth. The elves of Lindon, Rivendell, and Lauren all struck out into J.R.R, harrying the Witch King's forces, and allowing his wretched minions no peace in their newly conquered lands. And so the Witch King, preoccupied with elven assaults, was unable to form an army capable of leading an assault on Eredine. As a result of the actions of the elves, J.R.R was able to lead a long and watchful reign of relative peace, suffering no further incursions into his lands, as the Dúnedain's land was made safe by the strength of the elves. Others would feel the weight of Amar's oppressive shadow, for in Arnor's folds there lived gentler folk with humble hearts, who favored peace and simplicity over the burdens of kingdom and crown in this age of sorrow and steel. The stores, a quiet and modest folk, found themselves caught in the churning tide of conflict they had long dwelt in. The Angmar nestled between the wild, rushing waters of the Horwell and Loudwater rivers, yet the lands that once fed them, where their children had played and harvests bloomed in their season, grew tainted by the threat of war. Amar's shadows stretched long and far, creeping over the hills and valleys, poisoning the air with fear. The stores, nay, the great warriors nor mighty kings knew they could not remain, for war was a cruel visitor, and they would not wait for his arrival. Some of these hobbits sought refuge in the wildlands across the mountains, forsaking their homes for the uncertain promise of new beginnings upon the banks of the Gladen. They became a people of the water fisher folk, who found solace in the murmur of the rivers. It is said from this quiet folk, living on the edge of the wildlands, there would one day come a small and twisted creature. Gollum he would be called, but Smeagol he was first, an unlikely soul bound to a fate far darker than any could have imagined. For him, not all of the stores heeded the call of the east. Some looked instead to the west and south. Their journey stretched across the broad plains and hidden valleys of J.R.R, but it was no swift march. It was a long wandering, one fraught with danger and uncertainty. During the hobbits' 2 long centuries of wandering, King J.R.R passed away, having ruled Eredine for 180 years, and his son J.R.R took to the throne of Eredine, and it was he who noticed their small footsteps as they wandered the lands of J.R.R. The sight of these meek yet determined hobbits must have moved something deep within him, for it was in the 161st year of the Third Age that the Fallowhide brothers Marco and Blanco set out from Bree, and having obtained permission from the High King at Fornost, they crossed the Brown River Bandu. With a great following of hobbits they passed over the bridge of stone bows that had been built in the days of the power of the North Kingdom, and they took all the land beyond to dwell in between the river and the far downs at once. The western hobbits fell in love with their new land, and they remained there, and soon passed once more out of the history of men and of elves. And so under the leadership of the brothers Marco and Blanco, a great number of hobbits gathered and set forth once more. As they finally came to the end of their long road, they would discover a green and fertile land, the sanctuary they had long sought. The Shire it would come to be called, and amongst its row-ring hills and gentle streams the hobbits would build their homes. However, this was an age where innocence was a rare flower, blooming only briefly before being scorched by the fires of war. Yet it was not only war that was to be feared, for a new evil would soon stir in the east, an evil from which even the Sh folk were not immune. Music. In the years after their hobbits first settled in the gentle hills of the Shire, when their laughter still rang fresh in the green fields, a new terror stirred in the east. It did not offer the cold malice of blade or the ominous beating of the drums of war, but something far more insidious, a creeping pestilence, the Great Plague. It was named a windless storm that crept over the land, bringing death and despair from the distant lands of Runnet. Eventually spread its deadly fingers toward Gondor in 1636, and soon made its way to Arnor, reaching first into Callan. The Dúnad of Callan, those who had held out with such stubbornness in the Barrow Downs, fell prey to the fever. Thus this once proud kingdom stood utterly abandoned, and in the still silence, the Witch-king sensed an opportunity, for the heart of Cárdan still beat faintly in the veins of the Dunedain, who might one day seek to reclaim what was lost, and so he devised a foul sorcery designed to ensure that none would dare to resettle these lands ever again. He cast a dark enchantment upon the Barrow Downs, that ancient and hallowed ground where the honored dead slept beneath the earth, but the dead would find no peace there now. It is said that the mounds of Ti Gorad, as the Barrow Downs were called of old, are very ancient, and that many were built in the days of the Old World of the First Age by the forefathers of the Adine before they crossed the Blue Mountains into Berrin, of which Lindon is all that now remains. Those hills were therefore revered by the Dúnad. After their return, and there many of their lords and kings were buried, the Witch-king called upon shadowy spirits, born from the void between life and death. These wraiths, twisted and hateful, were sent to ram among the tombs, transforming the once sacred earth into accursed soil. The Witch-king's spirits stirred the very bones of the dead, awakening them to a cruel parody of life. Skeletal fingers once clasped in eternal rest twitched and clawed their way from the earth. The dead of Cárdan no longer slept. They walked once more, trembling. He looked up in time to see a tall, dark figure like a shadow against the stars. It leaned over him. He thought there were two eyes, very cold, though lit with a pale light that seemed to come from some remote distance. Then a grip stronger and colder than iron seized him. The icy touch froze his bones, and he remembered no more. The spirits who dwell on the Barrow Downs would come to be known as the barrow-wights, and were terrifying to behold as ghastly figures with an eerie pale light glimmering from their sunken eyes. They spoke with voices deep and hollow like the dirge of the cold wind that howled across their domain, and their touch, should it find a living soul, felt like ice creeping into the flesh. The rings they wore, a reminder of their forgotten glory, clinked like chains heralding their coming. The very air over the hills seemed colder and heavier, and those who wandered into the mist too far never music returned. In the year 1851, King Errol, great-grandson of Arb II and sovereign of Eredine, rallied the remnants of his people. He had not forgotten the proud legacy of his forefathers, nor that the blood of Númenor still coursed through his veins. He sought to reclaim the lands that were lost and re-establish Arnor as a unified kingdom. His campaign would begin in Cárdan, for here lay his best chance to drive back the tide of darkness. If he could defeat the forces garrisoned here, he could re-establish the lost frontier at the Weather Hills, and from there have a base to push onward and drive the evil men from Rúda. However, the Dúnad was still much diminished in strength, and this was a fight that he could not take on alone, so men once again sought the aid of the ancient and wise elves of Lindon and Rivendell. Together they stood upon the fields of Cárdan. The banners of the Dúnad flew alongside the shimmering sigils of the Eldar for the first time in centuries, and there beneath the cold watchful skies they descended upon the forces of the Witch-king. The elves and men unleashed their fury as they surged forward, blades flashing as the thunder of hooves sounded upon the plain. The forces of Angmar were outmatched and inevitably began to waver before being routed by the resolute might of the allied armies, leaving the plains of Callan to witness yet another sun rise over the bones of fallen warriors. Through the strength of their alliance, they had freed Cárdan once more, and Errol sought to resettle the reclaimed lands. But though the armies of men and elves had vanquished the threat of Amar's armies, they had not driven off the spirits that lingered there. No torch could banish the shadows that clung to the Barrow Downs, no sword could cleave the air of despair. The people of the north recoiled from the land, for they were a folk steeped in ancient belief and superstition. To them, the rising of the dead was a curse that could not be understood nor undone. Errol, despite his valor and victories, could do nothing. The people would not return to a land where the veil between life and death had been torn. Thus, the land of Callan remained a silent realm of ghosts, a place that only the dead could abide, and the flame of hope that Errol ignited for a reunited Arra was extinguished by the chill fingers of the Barrow Wights in the very same year that J.R.R. attempted to retake Callan, a force of wagon-riding warriors from the east, known as the Way Riders, descended upon Gondor. Their savage attacks, driven by their bitter hatred for the west, tested the strength of the proud southern realm. This new threat caused whispers of a conspiracy to swirl from Eredine to Gondor. Could it be, they wondered, that the Witch-king and the Way Riders were each puppets of a hidden orchestrator lurking in the shadows? It was said in secret councils that the two kingdoms, estranged by years and distance, might yet find their fates bound together once more as they strived against a common foe. And so Gondor and Arnor chose at last to renew their ancient bonds. It was in the year 1940 that this pact was sealed with a royal marriage. Prince Eredwi, the proud heir of Eredine in the north, took the hand of Fuel, the radiant daughter of Gondor's king. Furiel could trace her lineage back to Anoran, while Avid was the descendant of Isildur. In this union, two noble lines, separated by centuries and sorrow, were together once again. The Dunad would now have sensed a dawning hope, a whisper of unity through every land where men of Númenor still lingered in the year 1940. For the King Onawar of Gondor fell in battle. His sons Tuamir and Faramir had each been slain in the wars, leaving the proud royal house of Gondor in ruins. In the north, news came to Furiel of the death of her father and brothers. Thus, with the throne of Gondor vacant, Avid's ambition stirred, for he was of Elendil's line, and of the blood of Isildur, the last High King. Yet it was not only through blood that he claimed the throne. By his union with Furiel, now the last living child of Onawar, the claim was strengthened, and so, by right of birth and by right of marriage, he stacked his claim to the high kingship of both Gondor and Arra. And it was then that the words of an old prophecy came to light, words that had been spoken upon his birth. It is said that this name was given to him at his birth by Malbeth the seer, who said to his father, "You shall call him, for he will be the last in Eredine, though a choice will come to the Dunad, and if they take the one that seems less hopeful, then your son will change his name and become king of a great realm. If not, then much sorrow and many lives of men shall pass until the Dunad arise and are united again." The stage was set for the realms of the Dunad to see the days of the High Kings restored. But in the eyes of the Council of Gondor, Eredine was small and insignificant when compared to mighty Gondor. It was now but a shadow of its former glory, and its people had dwindled. The lord of this realm was therefore not deemed to be a suitable ruler for their illustrious southern realm. Led by the voice of the steward Panda, the council rejected Arod's claim, and instead crowned Anil as their new king. For Anil commanded Gondor's southern armies under Onawar, and he had recently won two great victories against the Haradrim and the Way Rares, which had saved Gondor. He was also a descendant of the house of Anarion, and therefore a fitting choice. With this decision the precedent was set, and the fate of Arra was sealed. Anil was however a man of wisdom and humility. He did not scorn Arvidwi for claiming the kingship, nor forget the bonds that had once united Gondor and Arra. In a message sent north, he wrote to Avadi with measured grace. He sent messages to Avid, announcing that he received the crown of Gondor, according to the laws and the needs of the South Kingdom. But I do not forget the royalty of Arra, nor deny our kinship, nor wish that the realms of Elendil should be estranged. I will send to your aid, when you have need, so far as I am able. It was however long before Anil felt himself sufficiently secure to do as he promised. As the bitter years dragged on, and the storm clouds gathered once more over the north, Aradi rose to take his father's place as Eredine king, and it was then that at long last the Witch-king prepared for one final assault upon the last vestiges of the North Kingdom. Arvid, we found himself standing against the darkness with limited resources at his disposal, his people dwindling, and his forces depleted. He sent word south to Gondor, calling upon Anel to honor his promise of aid, for the doom of Arra was at hand, and the Witch-king's final blow would fall hard and heavy, threatening to bring a violent end to the Northern Kingdom once and for all. The winds from the north grew sharp and bitter as the Witch-king marched forth, driving his host through the winter snows that covered the land. They descended upon Eredine in great strength, and this time we knew he could not save his kingdom without aid. The defenders looked hopefully to the shores for reinforcements from the south, but no ships of Gondor would come. Most of the hobbits, gentlefolk unused to the clangor of war, fled to the deep woods and shadowed valleys, seeking refuge from the chaos. But some among them, those with keen eyes and steady hands, resolved not to hide in the shadows, but to fight for those who gave them the lands, which they now called home. And so a force of hobbit archers, small of stature, but mighty in spirit, marched to Fenost, and to the aid of the Dunad in their hour of need. There the hobbits stood alongside the brave Defenders whose fate fast approached, heralded now by the thunder of the drums of war. Suddenly the entire might of Angmar came rushing out of the night like a tide, black and unstoppable, crashing upon the walls of Fornost. The hobbits' arrows flew swift and true, but the enemy were too many. Before long the ladders clattered against the ramparts, and the enemy were upon them. The Dunad fought brave in the face of overwhelming odds, but before long, Fornost was overrun. Not a single hobbit survived there. Small bodies laying still among the fallen heroes of the north. Some of the surviving Dunad were able to flee the city, yet the Witch King would not relent. He pressed onward his forces, driving the remaining men across the rushing waters of the River Lune. Yet, even as all seemed lost, King Avid rallied a force upon the windswept North Downs, and here they stood weary and few, holding back the tide of darkness, fighting with the ferocity of those who had nothing left to lose. Only when the fires of hope had burned down to their final embers did Arvid relent. He and his remaining guard mounted their steeds, their horses swift as the wind that howled through the barren hills carried them northward into the frozen wild, away from the ruin of their home. And so the north fell silent, the lands lay stained with blood and littered with the dead. The realm of Eredine, once strong and proud, lay in ruin, its people scattered, its lands finally overrun. Music. Arvid sought refuge in the tunnels of the old dwarf mines deep beneath the frozen peaks of the northern mountains. There he lingered for a time with his few surviving companions, but hunger soon forced them out into bitter winds that swept the land above, where the once proud king was forced to beg for aid in a land where little pity was known. But there was hope yet even in those desolate lands, for the Luth, the snowman of Forel, had long dwelled in these parts. They were hardy folk, descendants of the Ford ancient men of the elder days, who had lived under the shadow of Morgotha's cold domain. The chill of that dark age still clung to the land, though it lay but 100 leagues north of the Shire with its rolling green hills. Here in Forel, the cold was a living entity that tested the resolve of any who stepped foot into its icy domain. The Lozo made their home on the great cape of Forel, jutting like a finger into the vast bay. They were a people shaped by the land. They dwelt in fear, secretive and weary of strangers. Some of these folk would roam the southern shores of the bay, camping at the feet of the mountains, and one such camp lay nestled on the frozen edge of the sea when Arvid and his men came wandering from the mines. But these were no welcoming saviors. The snowmen regarded him with suspicion, their eyes narrowing beneath thick furs. Avadi, king without a kingdom, had little to offer them, only a few jewels which held little worth to the Luth, who had no love for such things, and they feared to aid the enemies of the Witch-king of Angmar, who they said could bend frost and thaw to his will. Yet they chose to pity the king and his men. They gave the Dunad a little food, and helped them to build snow huts for shelter there on the unforgiving shores of the Bay. We waited, gazing southward with hope that grew thinner as each day passed. For his horses had perished, and the way home was lost to him. All he could do was await rescue, unaware if any would ever come far to the south. Kidden learned of the king's desperate flight, and without delay he sent a ship northward to Forel to bring him back to Lion. Yet even the sea seemed to conspire against them as Kont winds harried the mariners, pushing them back and delaying their arrival. But after many long days the ship found its way to the frozen bay, where the mariners of Kidden with keen eyes spotted a small flickering fire which was kept alive by Arvid and his company. The snowmen, seeing the ship's arrival, were at first stricken with awe and dread. None among them could remember such a vessel, and as Avid stood on that frozen shoreline watching his salvation draw ever nearer, the chief of the Lozo came forward, his fur-lined face shadowed with unease. He breathed deep of the northern wind and shook his head, his voice low and grave as he warned Avid not to board the ship. And the chief of the Lozo said to Erid, "Do not mount on this sea monster. If they have them, let the seamen bring us food and other things that we need, and you may stay here till the Witch King goes home, for in summer his power wanes, but now his breath is deadly, and his cold arm is long." But Avid did not take his counsel. He thanked him, and at parting gave him his ring, saying, "This is a thing of worth beyond your reckoning, for its ancientry alone it has no power save the esteem in which those hold it who love my house. It will not help you, but if ever you are in need, my kin will ransom it with great store of all that you desire." And so the ring of Barrow, which had once adorned the hand of Beren in an age of legend long past, was saved from the doom that followed. For the Lozo's warning was not without merit. The counsel that the chief had given, whether by chance or some deeper wisdom, might have saved the king had it been followed. For scarcely had the ship begun to move toward the open sea when a terrible storm came out of the north. The sky darkened and blinding snow swirled in furious gusts, driving the ship back toward the jagged ice floes that stretched far out from the shore. Even the seasoned mariners of Codon were powerless against the fury of the storm. Ice-like claws closed in upon the ship, pressing against its hull with relentless force. The wood groaned, splintered, and with a thunderous crash, The ship was shattered as the storm raged on. Arvid, the last king of Eredine, perished beneath the icy waves of the northern seas. Music. The Witch King sat proudly upon the throne of Eredine, his victory complete, while his dark minions tainted the halls of Fanost with their presence. Yet in the distant south, Eöl, king of Gondor, had not forgotten his vow. The king's heart was burdened with the weight of Avid's last desperate plea for aid. Even as the Witch King's forces closed in upon the doomed remnants of Eredine, Eöl had moved with all the swiftness his great realm could muster. He knew the north was falling. He knew the hour was late, but he would not abandon his word. Gathering his strength, he called forth the might of Gondor, and gave command of the great fleet to his son, a prince of fierce valor named, or the black sails of the Gondorian ships darkened the sea like a storm upon the horizon, swift on the wind. But alas, the enemy's malice worked faster than even Gondor's speed. By the time Aenar's prows kissed the shores of Lindon, the doom of Eredine had already been sealed, or discovered how the Witch King had struck the final blow, and that Avid we the last king of that forsaken realm had gone to his grave beneath the icy northern seas, believing that Gondor had abandoned him. Yet even these dire tidings would not dissuade, or for the force that Eöl had sent north was no mere token of aid, it was a host vast beyond reckoning. But when Ananur came to the Grey Havens, there was joy and great wonder among both elves and men, so great in draught, and so many were his ships that they could scarcely find harbourage, though both the Harland and the Fall and also were filled, and from them descended an army of power with munition and provision for a war of great kings. Most of all the horses were praised, for many of them came from the vales of Anduin, and with them were riders tall and fair and proud princes of Ranian. And at Lindon Kidden put forth a call that swept through the lands like a clarion cry in the cold dawn. He called upon all elves who would fight. Many came, fair folk with their bright swords and ancient bows, who had seen both the and fall of J.R.R. and would now see it free of the Witch King's foul presence. And of course the surviving men of Eredine rallied to his banner, for in this great host that now assembled they saw their chance to finally purge their lands of their menacing foe. But it was not only men and elves who answered Kieran's summons. An unlikely force emerged from the wild, that even Kidden in all his ancient wisdom could not have anticipated. Hobbits once again the Shire sent forth its archers. They marched not for glory, but for the love of their lands, for the peace of hearth and home, and for a freedom that they would not see torn away. Thus upon the shores of the north a great host gathered, an alliance forged of hope, bound by friendship, and spurred forth by a love for the free lands of Middle-earth. It was a force unlike any the Witch King had yet faced, a union of powers, each with its own strength, bound by a single purpose: to drive the darkness from the north, and to cast the shadow of Angmar into the abyss from whence it came. The great host made its way across the waters of the River Lune, but they did not march straight on to Fanost, for the Witch King did not cower in his grim fortress. Rather, he sought to meet them in the field, certain that these warriors, like all others before them, would be cast back into the river, and so they instead ventured north into the hills of Even Dim, and there they waited. Finally, the Witch King's armies assembled upon the plain between the glittering waters of Nael and the looming north downs. The enemy had walked into their ambush. The call went out, and the host of the west descended, crashing into the unsuspecting ranks of Angmar as the roar of battle rose into the heavens. The blackened banners of Angmar soon faltered, its iron ranks began to crumble beneath the overwhelming charge, and fear took root in the hearts of the Witch King's foul servants. The orcs and evil men began to fall back towards Fanost, knowing that the day was lost. But Or had learned the ways of war from his father well, and had personally led a cavalry force around the north of the hills in secret, intending to surprise the enemy with a cavalry charge from the rear. But when the enemy came into view, they were already falling back to Fanost. He knew he could not allow them to reach safety, forcing a costly assault upon the walls. So sensing his opportunity, he sounded the charge. The Gondorian cavalry, led by the bold Aur and his household guard, came sweeping down unseen from the north, and came upon their foe with gleaming steel. As CS of Gondor and Osgiliath rang out in the turmoil, what had begun as retreat had become a rout as Amar's army broke, scattering in blind panic. In the chaos the Witch King was able to rally a portion of his shattered forces, and began to lead them to the north. His only thought now was to reach the cold safety of Doom, but the relentless young captain Or gave chase with his cavalry. In that moment, the Witch King halted his retreat, and appeared as a looming spectre of death, black-robed, black-masked, mounted on a black steed that seemed to carry the very shadows of despair with it. He came with a piercing cry that froze the blood of all who heard. it his eyes locked upon one man. The gallant young captain of Angmar would not turn from his challenge, and so he prepared to charge, but no mortal horse could bear the terror of the Witch-king's presence. Aenar's steed reared in fear, fleeing from the battlefield, carrying its rider far from the enemy. He sought to slay, and then from the Witch-king's throat came a laugh, a sound that was not of this world, that sent ripples of fear through the hearts of all who were gathered there. He delighted in the fear he provoked, and knew that or could not hope to defeat him, but his cruel laughter was cut short. Riding upon a pale horse, as bright as moonlight itself, came Glendale fresh from the hunt. No words passed between them, no clash of sword or spell. At the mere sight of the elf lord, the Witch-king was filled by something he had not known for an age, fear. He turned and fled, spurring his dark mount into the gloom, or in his sought to pursue him, eager to regain his honor. But Glorfindel, with eyes that saw farther than any mortals could stayed him. Ananur now rode back, but Glorfindel, looking into the gathering dark, said, "Do not pursue him. He will not return to this land. Far off yet is his doom, and not by the hand of man will he fall." These words many remembered. Hence a prophecy was born. As the Witch-king of Angmar was at last driven from the north, his power was broken, and the army of Angar was no more. Arra was free of the shadow, though the lands now lay in ruin. Its people scattered, and few the light of its former glory was almost gone, but did not fade entirely. But even in the darkest of times hope can endure. The line of kings did not perish with avid we, for it lived on in his son Arono. However, Arono would not sit upon a great chair of carven stone, nor wield a scepter before the eyes of many. Instead, he sought to pass on the memory of what was lost, and to guard what remained of the kingdom of his forefathers. Thus the chieftains of the Dunedain were born, guardians of a lost kingdom that now only lived in the tales of past glory. The remaining Dunedain, under his leadership, became known as the Rangers of the North. Ever watchful, ever hidden, they were guardians, silent sentinels moving in shadow, unseen by many inhabitants of the very lands they protected. Their tales were seldom told, their names scarcely known, for they carried no banners and sang no songs of their victories. The sons of the chieftain were not raised in the wild alone, but fostered in the ancient halls of Rivendell. There, beneath the wisdom of Elrond, they learned of mighty Numa and of Elendil the Tall. They were taught the weight of their heritage and the burden that lay upon their shoulders. Elrond held a great deal of affection for all those who descended from the kings of old, for his twin brother Elros was the founder of Númenor. Elros the half-elven forsook immortality in order to be counted among men. It was he who founded Númenor and who established the bloodline of the Dunedain. Therefore, Elrond wished to honor his brother's legacy, ensuring that his memory endured, and it was in Rivendell too that the heirlooms of the Dunedain were kept. The ring of Barrow-wights was recovered from the snowman of Farrell, the shards of Neril broken, and yet waiting for the moment when they would be reforged, and the scepter of Arnus, once the symbol of kingship, now lying in quiet reverence, waiting for a hand worthy to hold it once more. Now that the war was over, the Osage folk finally lived in peace. Once more the troubles of the world seemed far from their quiet fields, and in the absence of the king, they chose their own thing to lead them, their lives simple and joyful, bloomed in the calm that followed the fall of Angar. Still among some hobbits a longing for the return of the king lingered, a faint and distant dream. But as the years rolled on, even that dream faded until it was all but forgotten. Yet what is forgotten is not always lost. 1,000 years after Avid's death, a king would emerge once more from the ancient kings of Númenor to kings of Gondor and Arra to the chieftains of the Dunedain. The line of kings would remain unbroken, and the last of this line, Aragorn, the 16th chieftain of the Dunedain, would rise as King Ellis, a sovereign of the reunited kingdom. Fanost and Arnus would be rebuilt, the people of Aenir would prosper and live in peace, and the banners of the king would fly from the ramparts once more as the new world that emerged finally shed the shadow of the Angar. Music. War. Thank you very much for tuning into Realms Unraveled. We would like to take this opportunity to light the beacons and call for aid. If you did enjoy this video, we would ask that you kindly click the like button below. Also, we would be very grateful if you would consider subscribing and clicking on the bell icon. And until next time, farewell fellow explorers of Middle-earth.